Hi, everybody. It's Liam Billingham, co-host of Oeuvre Busters. George is on vacation, and what a perfect time to sit down with my friend, Annie Malamet. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Liam.
How are you?
Good.
What's going on?
Not much. You know, it's really hot here in Brooklyn.
It's really hot here.
Yeah.
It is. It's awful. It's so bad. So bad. August heat.
The doldrums.
Everyone, today the word of the week is doldrums. Speaking of heat, we're here to talk about Phillip Seymour Hoffman. I feel like you and I had a conversation a while ago, like probably over a month ago now, about kind of, I don't know, his work that would be where he played gay or queer characters.
Yeah.
And you sort of made me realize that he played a lot more queer characters than I had remembered.
He played gay a lot.
Played a lot of gay.
Yeah.
I can think of 4. I can think of, obviously, Capote.
Mm-hmm. Boogie Nights.
Flawless.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of the movie The Master.
Definitely the movie The Master.
Based on the clip that we just watched. And I want to hear, kind of your thoughts on it, because one of the things we've talked about with the show a little bit is the idea of Phil Hoffman as an everyman. Like, as a straight white guy, who has a podcast, I think I always sort of was like, oh, there's a guy who, to me, at least, read as, I kind of identified with him as an everyman, so to speak. And what that does a little bit is it makes you go, as an adult now living my life, I've kind of realized, like, oh, that's not like that's a very like coded way to think about it. Like, oh, everyman, but he's like he's a white guy. He's like a big white guy. But so I was thinking about that a little bit, and then the conversations about him playing gay like really interested me, because now it probably wouldn't be as appropriate for him to play a lot of these parts, which I think is a positive thing ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, it's complicated. I mean, I guess I would push back on that a little bit and say that he is an everyman of a kind,
right,
even when he does play gay. He doesn't play like a beefcake, right? He plays more of like sort of the internal dialogue of a lot of gay men who suffer from like body dysmorphia and insecurity in that community. And I do notice that with the queer characters that he plays, like it's never a super confident person, and part of that also has to do with the homophobia of the writing of those parts.
Okay, interesting.
Of, you know, him acting as sort of a, like, for example, in Boogie Nights, like that whole character could easily be a gay joke, but because but because Phillip Seymour Hoffman brings so much nuance to every character, it ends up being something a lot deeper than that. But with a lesser actor, easily could have been a write-off gay joke moment.
Do you feel like, so to that point, like we've talked about that scene a little bit, especially in relationship to his like part in Happiness, which has this like, I do this ridiculous impression of like kind of thing. But it's like, it kind of exists in that kind of like really, I guess in a way, I mean, in that film, in Boogie Nights, he's closeted in kind of a way, but also just like really repressed.
Super repressed, super cringy.
Right.
I mean, in that film, I sort of think of him as like a kind of a gay archetype, like a very closeted guy who is obsessed with this unattainable straight man.
Played by Mark Wahlberg, who's so hetero, like kind of so hetero.
Yeah,
in that
that it's like a joke, but at the same time, I mean, nobody's gayer than straight men, okay? Let's put that out there.
Agreed.
Yeah. So you could dissect that a little.
Write that down as the name for the episode.
No one does homoeroticism better than straight men.
Yeah.
So That, I mean, you know, we could dissect Mark Wahlberg's character, but we're
in
talking
everything too. Mark Wahlberg has a quality. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he's, you know, that's kind of, and I'm obviously kind of going off on a tangent here, but it kind of goes back to that whole thing of like women's beauty and beauty standards are dictated by men, and men try to counter that by saying like, oh, well, the beauty standards for us are also impossible. And I'm like, those were made by men.
Right.
So
well, this kind of comes back to something I was saying that I don't think I articulated super well, is that like, based on my own kind of like body issues and those kinds of things, I'd look like a guy of like Phillip Seymour Hoffman, be like, I can relate to that guy, whatever that might mean. But the thing that's interesting about that, at least the way that I think about it, is like that it's a kind of everyman thing, but that's denying the way that a lot of the time the everyman is like the Mark Wahlberg or the Beefcake or the like kind of like there was something about him that felt like more attainable as an artist and an actor to like whatever regular people are.
He's a beta male icon.
He's kind of a beta male icon. That's such a good way to put it. Yeah, he has that quality of being like,
not to like use incel language, but yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Well, I spent when I think about him now and the fact that he passed away, but when I think about what would he be doing now? Like, I'd be really curious to see the kind of parts he'd be doing now, because I feel like he'd be a great actor to approach some of these like really terrible human beings that are ruining everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a like a the would've, the could've, should've.
Yeah.
Like, who knows what kind of person he would be now. I mean, I feel like so many actors who are like really coming up when I was growing up, like him, have sort of become horrible people also. So, like, who knows? I mean, we're living in this really weird moment where we're kind of, just seeing a lot of people pivot or just kind of, like, lose their minds completely.
I know. It's nice, and it's also with him, it's like, I mean, one of the things that I loved is I feel a certain amount of like, no, Phil's a good, like, Phil be a good guy. Like, I have that sort of feeling about him.
I hope so.
But
yeah.
I know it's like, and then also the fact that he is gone has kind of like cemented his status. Like, he was a legend of an actor, I think.
Yeah,
but it's also,
and will always be, and nothing can tarnish that.
No.
And he brought so much nuance to the queer characters that he played.
Right.
Like Flawless, for example. I wouldn't call that character a gay man, because that character is queer. That character wants gender reassignment surgery.
Right.
So whether or not they wrote it responsibly, whatever, but I would just say that's a queer character. He brings so much nuance to this character in this otherwise schlock fest of a movie.
It is.
I mean, it really
Schlockfest raves Annie Malamet.
I mean, it's literally just Robert De Niro being an awful person and like using a queer person to find out, like, hey, maybe this fag is okay.
There is a straight guy blossoming because of a gay character kind of qualities. Even if I watch clips of it, and it was interesting because it immediately felt that way. That it was kind of like, this white guy needs to fix his life. Let's like have the queer character save him.
Yes.
Oof. Can I read you a quote?
Yes.
So in Out magazine in 2005, I did a very little bit of research, and I thought this would be an interesting way to talk about Flawless, but also these four movies. So there was this in October 2005, right when Capote. Did you see Capote? Capote was coming out. He did Phillip Seymour Hoffman did an interview with Michael Mustow. And I couldn't find the whole thing, but I found some excerpts. And there was one quote that I thought was interesting, which Michael Mustow said, "Capote is certainly not your introduction to playing gay. Are you drawn to gay projects, or do they find you?" And Phillip Seymour Hoffman's answer, which I'm really curious to get your take on, is as follows. Quote, "When I play somebody gay, I never think of it as I'm playing a gay character. It's interesting to play all the different aspects of the character. There's something else about the character that's pulling me there that I identify with. With Flawless, it's not that he was gay. I found it more interesting that he thought he was a woman. With Capote, it's the story that he had as an artist. And in Boogie Nights, he was so completely stunted, I don't even think he knew his attractions were of a gay nature."
Yeah, I mean, some problematic language going on there, but ignoring that because I'm going to give straight people the benefit of the doubt that they just don't know what to say, as opposed to just being malicious about it. I think that is I see that in the queer characters that he plays. Like, it's so obviously not this is a gay character.
Right.
And I guess like that is sort of my, like I go back and forth with this of like, should gay people be playing gay people and only gay people should play gay people? I don't know if I agree with that. I think the issue is, you know, people not being able to be out and still having movies made about their experience. I think that's the friction there. Right. But I definitely, when he's talking about, you know, seeing the other aspects of the character, like in Flawless, which is not, I mean, it's not like a super nuanced movie about queerness, directed by a gay man.
Right.
So, you know, there is
and a gay man who kind of, I was thinking about this, like really had quite a career, and it was wasn't defined, at least in terms of his career and the kind of things he did. It wasn't like a huge part. It's like he was such a Hollywood craftsman to some extent that like it was interesting to go like, oh yeah, Joel Schumacher was like a gay man who was really given more kind of like, he made a whole bunch of different types of movies, and I don't know, it just kind of struck with me when
he did. I mean, I just on my podcast talked about The Lost Boys.
It was a pretty gay movie.
Oh, it's one of the gayest without ever explicitly saying it, but it's extremely gay. And Flawless, I mean, is just like very explicit with it. But it's, I mean, Flawless is like very schlocky, like as I was saying, but Phillip Seymour Hoffman is the only thing that saves that movie.
Right.
And in Boogie Nights, it's the same thing where that character, it could easily be like, oh, he tries to kiss Dirk, and it's like this laugh moment. But instead, he brings such a nuance and pain to that moment that it really becomes the moment in the party in 1980 when everything is like shifting to pain, to this painful thing. And that interaction really sets that off.
Right.
So it's much more nuanced than a lot of other people have played gay.
So watching, I want to come back to that because before we talked, we also watched the scene from The Master,
right?
Which is pretty gay.
Yeah.
But I think it sort of gave me made me think a little bit more about Paul Thomas Anderson's films, because these are obviously both Paul Thomas Anderson films. But which we were decided earlier on we weren't going to do a Paul Thomas Anderson festival, but it's interesting in relation to these two. But you'd seen Flawless before.
Yes, a funny story. I saw Flawless because my piano teacher, who always showed up wasted to our piano lesson. I know, my parents exposed us to like a cavalcade of creeps growing up. But
Doldrums and Cavalcade. This is like an amazing. I was like, please write a novel. Yeah. I want to read it.
I do word of the day. Do my dictionary app.
Today.
No, it's not. It's hyperbolic today, I think.
Ooh.
But yeah, she always showed up like kind of drunk, and you know, I was a little homo, so she was like, "You should watch this movie."
Watch Flawless.
Yeah, because it was about piano lessons, sort of.
Right.
Yeah, so I watched it when I was like in middle school, I think. And I thought it was like really touching because I was a kid. And then, of course, like watching it as an adult, I'm like, wow, this blows. But it's...
Hey, Joel, this blows. Love Annie.
I love The Lost Boys.
But I love The Lost Boys.
I'm being so hard on it. There are moments in the movie that are good.
Do you feel like for the time it's a little more progressive than it, like, I mean, now maybe it's cringeworthy because it's 17 years old or almost 20 years old probably at this point. But because watching it, I sort of felt the same way. Like, I was like, oof, this is, like, rough.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of moments that I love, like when Robert De Niro, for the first time, is shouting out the window at the group of gay men in Phillip Seymour Hoffman's apartment, and he's like, shut up. And without missing a beat, Phillip Seymour Hoffman just leans out of the window and is like, you shut the fuck up. Like,
that's good.
Yeah, like, without no hesitation. And I don't know, there's, like, so much subtlety there. Like, you, in that moment, you know, this guy does this to him all the time, to Phillip Seymour Hoffman. So you know already that, you know, Phillip Seymour Hoffman is like on the defensive immediately. And I love the moment also when they're like taunting him and like singing really loudly out the window. Like, there's some really great moments of like gay joy in this movie.
Okay.
That I feel like, you know, Joel Schumacher lends that experience to in those moments. But overall, I mean, this concept of like, this is somebody who was like viciously homophobic to this person.
It's really hard to watch.
Yeah. And now he's like his buddy and like doing favors for him. That would never happen.
And it's like a redemption thing. It made me think a little bit about a similar time, the Greg Kinnear part in As Good as It Gets.
I was gonna bring that up. Yeah. It's like it gives the character this redemption, which is problematic because that actually is how straight people use queer people in real life, like to make themselves better people. Like I've had so many straight friends say to me like, being friends with you has made me realize like all of these things about the world. And I'm like, you're welcome. I literally have no choice but to live in the world like that. But but thanks for coming along for the ride.
It's kind of like a weird tokenism.
Yeah.
That is, and I think that part of that is because we, like in the 90s and before, but obviously like two very clear examples, it feels like movies that kind of just did that. And so people watch them and everyone absorbs this shit and they go like, oh, okay, like this is fine, because they feel some kind of sense of like relief because they're able to like, oh, that's like how quaint, like, oh, they're just gay people, like it doesn't really like help the cause.
I guess this person really is a human being. So I mean, it's when that's really like the period there at the end of that is like, and at the end he realized he was human, and it's like cool, but he had to suffer through his homophobic harassment before they got to that point.
And because the movie begins with the presumption that like, as an audience member, everyone is like, well, gay people are inhuman or subhuman, right? Like if a movie starts with that as like the central tenet, it's like, that's really problematic, and probably not in the eyes of straight people quite as problematic now as it is. Like now that feels a little more obvious.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like when this movie came out, everyone was like, "Oh, yay!"
Well, people used to take it for granted, and I mean, often still do, that movies are for them. Like, oh, this is for me. This is for a straight person. I mean, it is for straight people. That movie, like, it definitely is. I mean, there's some really beautiful moments of interaction and bonding between the queer characters, but overall, like, there's sort of this like spectacle, like that. There's a scene, I know maybe you don't remember from Flawless, but there's a scene where they're like fighting, the gay people are fighting because they're like doing this drag contest.
Yes, I watched that scene earlier today.
Yeah, and they're like, it's funny, like I had to laugh because the person is like, we need lesbians.
Right.
Like, that is something that maybe like would have happened where they're like a joke, like, oh my god, we need to get some lesbians in here. But the way it's played is so like for a straight gaze. So it's it you know, there's a very heterosexual gaze on this movie.
Well, and watching it, I felt like it was like, look how funny gay people are.
Exactly.
They're so funny.
Right.
The one scene that I did want to talk briefly about, because I felt like it speaks to his performance, but also there's a scene early on where it's pretty early on in the movie where Robert De Niro in his stroke performance leaves a lot to be desired. No offense to Robert De Niro, because I think that's a really hard thing to do.
No, the stroke performance was not great.
It sort of borders, well, it is caricature-esque.
Yeah.
But he's like, talks about how he calls him a drag queen.
Yes.
And Phillip Seymour Hoffman has this speech about like, well, I don't like that term.
Yeah.
And he talks about like growing up and like being in a play, and like it felt very humanizing to me because it didn't. The choices that Schumacher makes, and there's only one cutaway to De Niro looking kind of like suspicious of him, but the scene doesn't feel as though it's photographed through that lens. It feels very nuanced to me.
It is. I mean, all of Phillip Seymour Hoffman's monologues in that movie, I mean, he's, to be honest, really good in that movie. Like, he's the only good thing about that movie to me. And he, you know, all of his monologues in it are really not played for any kind of laughs or... It's so I see in that quote that you read, I see that he brought that to it. Like, it really wasn't about, oh, this is a queer person. Like, it was like, who is this person? Who is this character? And those are like the parts of the movie that are redeemable. Yeah,
that was my feeling. Like, I was sort of like, oh, this is like very, like, kind of touching.
Yes.
Like, I felt that moment, and it transcended like whatever kind of stereotypes the movie presents to me of either character.
Right.
Interesting. And there's a specific moment in there where he goes he says, "I'm an artist," and then he kind of giggles and backs away from De Niro, and I was like, holy shit, that is someone that has had to justify their own existence for a long time. Because straight people are like, you're a drag queen.
Yes. So. And that's a good moment. I mean, any of those moments where it's really him just talking are really good. There's also a moment where he's going through a breakup that is really touching. Overall, don't love the messaging of this movie, but do have a soft spot for his performance in it.
It feels, we've talked a lot about on the show him being the best part of any movie. That he's the best part of many movie. Completely out of the left field though is something like Mission Impossible 3, where you're like, oh, this is kind of not a great movie, but he's so rooted in reality as opposed to everyone around him.
And he always is.
Right.
I mean, that's his thing with these performances is they're always so rooted in reality, which is what keeps it from being caricature when he plays queerness.
There was another bit in the same Out magazine that was specifically about Capote, and he was talking about Capote's status in terms of if he was out, when the movie takes place in real life and as opposed to the film. And he was like, yeah, I don't know that he was going around saying I'm gay, but he was out. He was an out person. And I thought that was sort of spoke to this quote because it was as an actor, it's interesting that, when you watch Capote, have you seen Capote?
Yeah.
At least to me, it feels not that relationship with Jack Dunphy is very central to the movie and what the movie has to say, but it also doesn't feel like it's spending a lot of time leaning too hard on his sexuality, even though it's so apparent in the character. It doesn't feel as though the movie is. It's interesting to watch it and think about what it's trying to say in terms of if it has anything to say about him being gay beyond the stuff in Kansas.
I think it does. Because I was listening to y'all's episode about this movie and, the connection that he has with one of the killers, you guys were saying is not necessarily a romantic connection. And I would maybe disagree with that. I think that it is. And I think it's just so well done and subtle that it just doesn't come off in the way that we are used to gay romances coming off, which are as maudlin or predatory. And I think it just shows.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I think it just shows a really authentic connection, and I think Truman Capote is sort of in love with him in a way, just in this very it's different than the way that he is in love with his partner.
Well, the relation. One of the things that's interesting to me that what you're saying, and I think that it's the relationship with Jack Dunphy just feels like people that have been together for a long time.
Right.
So it's kind of yep, this is us. We're a couple. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, but they love each other. The thing that's interesting to me about the relationship with Perry is that it's certainly not predatory, but it feels manipulative in the sense that he's gonna profit in a. I don't know. He never ended up really profiting off him, but there's that whole journalistic it's so compelling because he's writing a nonfiction narrative.
Yes.
He's obsessed with or in love with.
And is he in love with him or is he in love with himself and all his grand ideas about this novel he's gonna make?
Yeah.
And that is something that we all do and is not unique to a queer experience, though maybe in some ways different because queer people often our partners mirror us in ways in which straight people can sort of avoid or not see it in the same way because we're both men or both women. So it's very that's why they're can you curse on this show?
Fuck it.
Okay. As a gay, there's the concept of dyke-alikes or gay men who basically date each other, people who look like each other, and there's that that could be part of it of this seeing this guy that is something you could have been if only you weren't such a sissy or whatever. So which is an element that's at play a lot in queer relationships. But yeah, I mean, who knows if he's really like truly in love with him or like the idea of him and of this brilliant thing he's going to write. But I think that comes out in the performance.
No, it's so compelling
Yeah.
in that sense. And like the way you're describing it kind of brings me back to the movie. And the scene towards the end when he knows they're going to get executed and he goes into the room and he's crying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, I think it's a really, I mean, I think it's a good movie. I think it's a great movie. I think it's an incredible performance. And one of the things that I think is incredible about it is the way the vanity kind of disappears throughout the course. Because there's that scene early on where he comes downstairs in the hotel and he kind of like spins around and he's just so like presentational.
Yeah.
And I think the movie does a nice job of like placing that character in this like very straight dude culture when he's in the police station or he's in that environment. But it's really kind of amazing to me how much ambiguity there is in that Perry relationship, because it's fucked up in the sense that like, yes, he's obsessed with himself, or he's obsessed with Perry maybe, or he's obsessed with his book, or he thinks the book's important.
Yeah, I mean, it's a typical problematic muse-creator relationship, just being played out in this like carceral queer space.
Carceral?
Yeah.
Carceral?
Like pertaining to like corporal punishment, or in a incarcerated space.
The language.
Yeah, I'm smart. I'm a smart person.
Like doldrums, I know. Let's talk quick. So we just watched this scene from The Master, which, as you said at the very end. So for those who are watching at home, we're not going to sample it, but it's the scene at the end where Phillip Seymour Hoffman sings "Slow Boat to China" to Joaquin Phoenix.
Sounds absurd.
But it's I've seen the film a few times. I don't know if I love the film, but I thought that the scene was really beautiful and really different from the other things we've seen that might be that are kind of queer or gay.
Yeah, I mean, because he's playing like an L. Ron Hubbard figure in that movie, and I don't know. I mean, do I have a difficult time believing L. Ron Hubbard was probably queer? Right. Not at all. That's a lot of people.
Right. Well, he created this whole crazy, probably a very repressed human being, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and you know, like, this is the other thing is, like, people are like, oh, I don't know if he was gay. He was married. It's like, well, there's a lot of other kinds of queerness other than being gay. So it's possible to, you know, love your wife and also love men.
Right. Well, the film deals with that a little bit, too, because the relationship between him and Amy Adams, like, a lot of the speculation is she's the master. The master of the titular master is his wife.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. And, I mean, in that scene, there's such like a level of connection and tenderness. It actually really reminded me of like Brokeback Mountain in a way, like the mood of that movie and the heartbreak between them.
It's pretty beautiful. Yeah,
and you know I know there's a couple scenes in that movie like where Amy Adams is jerking off Phillip Seymour Hoffman.
It's very domineering and controlling.
Yes, and he's like really kind of thinking about Joaquin.
Mm-hmm.
And they both kind of do that with women in the movie.
Right.
And, you know, using women as a way to sort of act out these other fantasies is also very typical theme in film and in life. So there's also that element to it. But yeah, I mean, they're clearly in love.
They're so in love in this scene. And it's beautiful. Like, I mean, they're beautiful performances. Like, Joaquin Phoenix just has this shot that seems to go on forever where his eye there's a tear coming out of his eye and it moves all the way down his face. And it's like, I don't know. I saw the big film on the big screen, and I do remember the scene, but I don't remember kind of being sort of. It's hypnotic. It's a really hypnotically filmed sequence.
And there's so much that's being said without being said.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he says, "If you come back, if we meet in a next life, you'll be my enemy, and I'll do everything to destroy you." Like even that is so erotically coded.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot that is unsaid.
Well, and it makes me, I mean, to come back, like, Paul Thomas Anderson is always the, like, dudes love Paul Thomas Anderson movies, you know, like, I mean, and I like his films too. It's not I really think they're great, but it's interesting to watch something like Boogie Nights, that specifically with the Hoffman character, and then to watch There'll Be Blood has a certain amount of homoeroticism to it, I
Absolutely.
think. And I think Inherent Vice does, between Brolin and Joaquin Phoenix.
Well, I think, I mean, a movie that is about men is inherently about masculinity.
Right.
Just by virtue of just being about men. And a lot of, you know, maybe a lot of people don't want to admit it, but a lot of straight male masculinity is homoeroticism. And the tension between, like, do I want to be this guy or do I want to be with this guy?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, very natural evolution of that story. So that has to be present when we're talking about relationships between straight men even.
Well, and I also think that, like, you know, speaking largely about the podcast, like the kickoff for this podcast is the movie Husbands, which is like so about male love.
Yes.
And then Phillip Seymour Hoffman, you know, I don't think it really occurred to me, but like is so, at least on so many of the parts that he did, there's that the queer element, or the male kind of bro-ish, kind of like in love with each other. Along Came Polly covers it a little bit. Like, that's a movie about masculinity.
Absolutely.
Like Mark Pagan like kind of eloquently put it. And it's like interesting to sort of think about how so many of these big famous, I mean, actors kind of engaged in this kind of like bro-y maleness in their careers. It's interesting to think about all of these things like as a larger picture. What's interesting about The Master to me is that he says, leave now or you could stay. And the way he says you could stay is so like, it's beautiful.
It's
like,
heartbreaking. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's a breakup.
It is a breakup. Yeah.
And yeah, it's really romantic.
And he also then says, like you said, I could destroy you. And it's like interesting to think about what what Paul Thomas Anderson there is saying a little bit. It's like, we're either together or you're dead.
Yeah. Codependency.
Woof.
Yeah, a lot of codependent themes going on too in these movies.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's kind of amazing. I don't think I said this to you before we started recording. I saw this movie twice, and I was in like the haze of like, I'd been traveling and I was sort of like jet lagged, so I couldn't trouble staying awake both times I saw it.
I mean, it's long.
It's long and slow. It's a little slow, but I don't think any of this kind of made sense. I remember kind of, and this was, you know, years ago, but I remember kind of being like, why is he singing? Why is that guy
he's in love with him.
What?
Yeah, and then you guys also did Talented Mr. Ripley too.
Oh yeah, how did we forget about?
Yeah, so I mean that's also like a gay ass love triangle.
So gay.
Yeah, without saying it explicitly.
There's the moment where Tom Ripley, and I think Matt Damon is really exceptional in that movie.
Oh, I love that movie.
I think it's kind of like a masterpiece of a movie. But he tracks them down in the record store, and what's his name? What is Matt Damon's character's name in that? Yeah, he grabs Jude Law and pulls him out, and there's a cut to a close up of Phil Hoffman, and he looks like he wants to murder Matt Damon.
Yeah, that's his boo.
It's his boo, right?
Yeah.
And it's so like, yeah, music and girls and boobs and stuff. Like, they're such bros.
I mean, bonding over boobs with another man is gay. I mean, sorry. It's, I mean, but this is like the other thing is like, I'm not even saying like, oh, it means you actually want to have sex with your friend. It's more about like a homosocial homoeroticism of it.
Yes.
Like, it's fun to feel sexy and like think about that stuff. And like, you know, you're homosocially bonding. Like, it's inherently homoerotic. But I mean, I think that there's a lot of like subtext in that movie about their relationship, the three of them, and, you know, being jealous because your best friend has a new best friend is a very typical queer experience.
Yeah. It's also terrible.
It is also terrible.
But then he kills Jude Law because he can't have him. Right? They break up and then he murders him. And then Phil Hoffman shows up at the apartment and runs it like, even though he suspects something is like wrong with like maybe that Matt Damon's character has killed him, Tom Ripley's killed him. I can't believe I forgot that his name was Tom Ripley. The movie's called The Incredible Mr. Ripley.
And Jude Law's Dickie, right?
Dickie Greenleaf. Wait, what? I have to rewatch this movie. But he goes to the apartment, and like there is that sort of, in Phil Hoffman, there's that sort of character that's a sort of understanding of like, what's going on here with you guys?
Yes.
What's happening here?
Yeah.
So it's really, really interesting.
And he's I thought I was the side piece.
Yeah, what about me? Yeah, no, and then he kills him too.
Yeah.
It's a love triangle.
Yes.
And then he falls in love with the other guy and kills him.
Yeah, and the woman, right?
Yeah, Gwyneth Paltrow. It's a really good performance.
I know, I forget about her because she's such a cuckoo bananas person now, but she was great back then.
Cuckoo bananas as Cocoa Puffs.
Yeah, Goop.
Goop. This episode brought to you by Goop.
she's so like, her role in that movie is so just to be this, locus, like for them to focus around while ignoring like how in love they are with each other, even though her performance is really good and she brings a lot of nuance to it. But yeah, she's there for basically like the no homo aspect of it.
That's why she wears that t-shirt that says no homo.
She's like such a fag hag in that movie.
I'm now sort of like going through his Phillip Seymour Hoffman's filmography and going like, was there anything else?
I'm trying to think too.
Not that I can think of, but that's like 5 films that like.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of films, and let's pull up his
filmography.
I believe the term is filmography really quickly and see if we can. You watch hearing this live, everybody. Wow.
Did he play gay again? I was also like researching for this episode. I was like, I'm so sad about his death.
It really messes me up. Not anything that I can find. There's a few films on here I've never seen. So that's a question. But
was there any queer side story in Doubt?
Oh, that's a good question. I've actually never seen Doubt.
I never have either.
And we're doing it soon.
Oh, okay, cool.
We will report back on that. But no, not nothing that like screams out to me. He did Flawless in 99. He did Magnolia in 99.
He did Next Stop Wonderland, which is another movie about 70s porn.
Right. That's so funny. But yeah, it's kind of amazing that and the thing of not even just the queer, but the thing of repression comes up a lot. We just recorded because we couldn't get a copy of Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. It's impossible to find, so we went back and did 25th Hour. And it's not.
I like that movie.
So repressed in that movie.
Yeah, maybe the theme of this whole thing is that Phillip Seymour Hoffman isn't so much an everyman, that he plays repression very well.
Yeah, and that
And
wow.
Yeah, and his queer characters. There's never like a happy queer character.
Yeah,
so,
especially in this context with the characters he played.
Yes, and they're all repressed, and that seems to be like a theme running through his oeuvre.
Well, the other day I was saying to George, I was like, I feel like, so to go beyond the everyman thing, which again, like, problematic, but there's what I would describe as Big Phil and Little Phil. And to be simplistic about it, Little Phil to me is sort of his more like his openly repressed, like his performance in Happiness, which is like, especially in the incel culture now, like looking back, like, whoa.
Ooh, that's a fascinating movie to talk about with regards to the rise of incels.
Yes, because it's woof. And then a little bit with Boogie Nights, there's a little bit of this just like, I don't know how to exist kind of thing. But then I was thinking, like, then there's Big Phil, which I would say is the parts in things like Mission Impossible 3 or The Master, where he has, like, charisma and is big and kind of, like, occupies these characters. But then watching that scene from The Master, you're like, talk about repression.
Yeah, he's so vulnerable in that moment and so little and,
Very, and L. Ron Hubbard was probably historically a bully.
Yes.
And created a religion to control people, which says something about repression.
Yes, yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, he just plays repression really well.
So this is interesting to think about because it's like what I would, from my own contextualization, is like, what an everyman, and you're pointing out like that might be a repression thing, which I think is really not like a huge part of problematic behavior.
I mean, it's
yeah,
and it's a huge part of like the problem with beta male culture, like feeling like, oh, you got cheated out of something, and you can't really express because every other guy is a Mark Wahlberg, and I'm just me. I'm just a Phillip Seymour Hoffman.
I'm just which is, like it's like that's really interesting to me because I think that like I said earlier on, like I identify with him as an actor and a performer and a human being, but I've now spent time being like, what? Why? What's that about? Because there is that sort of like the easy narrative being like, well, I got screwed. Or I think more than that, one of the most chilling moments in Happiness is he's on the phone and he's at work and he's like saying something awful. And then someone's like, hey, I forget his character's name, Phil. And turns around, he's like, yes. And you're like, oh.
That is so incel. I mean, that's like what's really scary about those people is like they're among us.
Yeah.
And like who knows who they really are.
Well, and it's like one thing, the thing about with that is that's 99. Like, as you pointed out, that's an interesting film to think about in relationship to this incel culture. And if he were if that character were written now, and again, Todd Solondz is like a very specific case, like, I mean, but would it be interesting to see a 50-year-old Phil Hoffman play a character like that now with like a smidge of self-awareness?
Yes, that would be interesting.
That would be great.
Yeah, because he's really good at it. And I mean, I think like the everyman thing, because it's, because guys who are like Mark Wahlberg think of Mark Wahlberg as the everyman. So it's who is the everyman, it's really just who you identify with because you see them playing out your cultural experience.
Right.
And Phillip Seymour Hoffman is not a leading man.
Mm-mm.
Like he's just a dude, average looking dude who happens to be a great actor. So gets kind of pigeonholed into non-leading man parts, even though he did get to play some really great parts in his life.
Yeah. And I mean, the leading man roles kind of came, I mean, with the exception of Capote, like came towards the end of his life and things like A Most Wanted Man and stuff, where he was able to, at that point in his career, like assume that.
Right, whereas a woman could never.
Right.
I mean, it's maybe really recently.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking of, like, Melissa McCarthy and Can You Ever Forgive Me? Like, she's the lead role in that, but she's also kind of a complicated queer weirdo character in that.
In the film.
Yeah.
And her career has led to that by doing a whole bunch of like really
doing a whole bunch of elaborate fat friend jokes.
Yeah, exactly. And like kind of not being allowed to exist outside of that context on screen.
Yeah.
Which is kind of exciting what's starting to seem to happen for her career now.
Definitely, but it takes so, and I mean, but on the other hand, it's like she could never play like a hero, like a woman who's like a spy who like, that would never happen.
Have you seen A Most Wanted Man?
I haven't.
So it's interesting you say spy because that's like one of the last things he did. And he plays a spy who's like investigating extremism in Berlin, like right in I believe in the years after 9/11. And it's a really tragic performance because it's about a man obsessed who's like, doesn't take care of himself, doesn't do anything to like kind of. He's not like the movie doesn't open with him getting up at 6 a.m. and running like 18 miles before like going to his office. It opens him in like a bar drinking and smoking and just like.
Well, and then from him, because a lot of leading men do that in movies, but coming from him, it's like there's a sadness to it because he looks so average.
Right.
It's not like a sexy like.
He'd never be given that other thing, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, look at me, I'm like working out. Like it's just not. Yeah. It's not the way he's contextualized.
Even when like a quote unquote like sexy buff man plays an anti-hero like that who like smokes and drinks and destroys his life.
James Bond.
John Hamm, Mad Men.
Yeah.
Right? That's like the biggest example I can think of. James Bond.
Those guys should not look the way that they look based on how they behave in those movies. They should be like, bro,
exactly. Yeah. Like they can get away with it because it's, it's like, oh, isn't it? He's tortured.
Yes.
So, whereas like when a normal looking person does stuff like that, it's like, oh, this person is straight up troubled in a not fun way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that actually attracts me to that part and attracts me to him as an artist and a person, and this is going to sound a little perverse, but it's like an honest thing, and John Cassavetes, is the self-destruction. I think it's really romanticized.
Yes. Well, yes. Yeah, male self-destruction is always super romanticized,
Yes.
whereas if like a woman is being self-destructive,
Yes.
it's like, look at this sad slut.
Oh, there's something wrong with
Yeah.
No, totally, 100%.
Yeah.
And it's with men, it's either the butt of a joke, as it would be in like a Along Came Polly, where he's just like a big flubby idiot and like
Who's like too confident to be
Yes.
to look the way that he looks.
And what's great about that performance is I love how hard he leans into confidence in those performances. He doesn't go like, "Oh, I'm sad." He goes like, "Yeah, I'm this guy." It's great.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting, but it's also, you could also read it as, because for those who don't know, I study this and I'm like giving a talk on it in October.
Which you're gonna pitch at the end. We want to hear more
Yeah,
about it.
plug. That is another role that fat people are also allowed to play, which is like they are so unaware of how weird and fat they are. Like it's
Right.
That's Melissa McCarthy's entire career. That's Rebel Wilson's entire career.
Right.
It's like they it makes them socially abnormal. Their fatness makes them socially abnormal. So the personality goes hand in hand with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, oh, like what right does this person have to be so confident? And that's the comedy of it, is like this person is so confident even though they're so average looking.
Yeah, and I think that movie plays with that in ways that are both like maybe a little subversive at times, but also in ways that are probably as retrograde. Like I'm thinking about the scene, I can't stop, where he's like shooting baskets and he's like, "White chocolate," and he just yells like random shit, and it's so goddamn funny.
Well, because he's funny. Yeah. Like
yeah,
it's funny. I mean, it's like Melissa McCarthy is hilarious in Bridesmaids,
right.
but it's an elaborate fat joke. The character.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, and that's like almost. It's almost ridiculous how both obvious that is and how sort of like under the radar that goes, like in terms of being like, that's like it's I mean, a lot of comedy obviously is other people's pain, but it's like it's amazing how that just kind of is accepted.
Oh yeah, I mean it's so accepted and so like taken for granted, and maybe only recently not cool to do, like very recently, like maybe for a year.
Yeah, well, I think that like I want to wrap up because you have other things to do, but I think that one thing that comes back to this whole idea of the everyman, and something that you brought, is that he, despite not being like a traditionally good looking or being like your archetypal image of anything, the opportunities that he's granted because of his maleness, because he's a man and because he's like considered a good actor, would not be allowed to anyone else. And that's not a criticism at all of him, but it's just like something I've been thinking about.
No, I mean it's not a criticism of him because he was a great actor, but it's just factual.
Right.
Like it's, a woman who looks like that. I mean, I talk about this quote all the time, but Rachel Dratch, like years ago from SNL, said in an interview, she was like, "I'm not a fucking troll, but because I am like an average looking woman, I can't get any parts that are not about like being an absolute troll."
She was supposed to be Liz Lemon on 30 Rock. Yeah,
but because Tina Fey is cuter, like it's,
One of the most absurd things to me is the whole downplaying of Tina Fey's like traditional.
I'm just an average girl.
And it's like, what are you talking
You're
about?
like a thin white woman who just happens to be a brunette. Okay, like you're not.
Look at my nerdy appearance.
Yeah.
Nobody's into me.
Yeah, because you have glasses. Sure.
Her phone rings. The guy in the other one's like, "Hey, it's Phil." Like, come on, like get out of here.
Yeah, like she's an objectively attractive woman.
Right.
And like disclaimer, I think everybody we're talking about is attractive.
Yeah.
Like I'm not even assigning value judgment, but that's just how the industry works.
Right.
And like Amy Poehler also is not an unattractive woman, but we are like gaslit into believing that these women are like they're above average looking people.
And basically anyone in Hollywood has to be a little bit on some level.
Yeah,
right?
except men.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's like they get kind of like ghettoized into certain characters. but they're allowed to have such illustrious careers, like in a way that women who look like that could never in past decades.
Well, we were looking at that clip from The Master before, and you're staring at these two faces for a long time, and at a certain point you're like, God, they're both so good looking.
Oh yeah, and I mean they're so like sexily grizzled, and I mean, yeah,
they really are. It's
yeah,
hot.
It's a hot scene. There's like
really
some really like intense sexual tension, and like Joaquin Phoenix is, you know,
he's so beautiful.
He's so beautiful, like objectively,
right.
like he's a very attractive man, and it's kind of, you know, refreshing to see this relationship between this like really hot guy and this like sort of average looking guy, and how he looks up to him and is like entranced with him in this sequence.
Yeah, it is actually really amazing. And to bring it back to Flawless real quick, I was like kind of watching some scenes and took some notes, and like you spend it like when Phil Hoffman is doing the speech when as Rusty, and you're sort of looking at him like, he's so pretty. He's like such a pretty person.
Oh my God, he does. I mean, this is another thing. I mean, I don't know if we have time to talk about it, but you know, just people playing cisgender people playing trans people, and that is one of the better examples in that movie, because there's like a lot of nuance to it, and he embodies somebody who is like sort of just coming into presenting a certain way all the time in a very realistic way. And
he's also not, God, we could talk, we have to do more of this because this is great, but he's also not, they don't, at least in the bits that I've seen, the drag queens do not come off as grotesque, like in the way that they might conventionally be in a movie that's not paying attention to that kind of nuance.
And I did notice also that a lot of the other people who are playing drag queens and queer people are probably actually queer people in real life. You know, not to stereotype my own kind, but like, come on.
It.
Yeah.
It seems like you're allowed. It's okay.
And, you know, that is interesting too, that element to it of like, there are all these actual queer people in the movie and around his character. And I don't know, I'm not trans, but like as a queer person, I did not find his portrayal to be particularly offensive or anything. I think like the concept of the movie is inherently offensive, but I don't think that his performance is.
Yeah, that's kind of my reading too. I mean, it just feels humanizing. And
I mean, with a lesser actor, it would have been
god
awful. Yeah. So, I mean, he really saves the movie. I mean, Robert De Niro is also a complete caricature of a homophobe.
Right.
Like he doesn't play that with any kind of nuance or subtlety like how it is in real life. So it's, you know, it's very overt, and he's a misogynist also. But on the other hand, I got to appreciate the tie between homophobia and misogyny that this movie presents to us, because they are inherently linked. So I think that maybe it was intentional, but I think that unintentional, but I think that is an interesting element as well.
We could go forever. I don't want to keep you here forever. But before we do go, thank you so much.
Yeah,
this was really
for
fun.
having me, yeah.
Do you want to pitch your talk that you're giving and your show? Please pitch your show, because now's the time to listen to your wonderful show.
Thank you.
Give money to your wonderful show.
Yeah, give me money.
What's your show called?
It is called Girls, Guts, and Giallo, and every week I have a different guest, and we talk about subversive cinema from a queer perspective.
If there's like an episode that you would recommend people start with, I have a thought, but I want to hear what you think.
I think they've all been really good. No,
all of them.
Like, for example, if you want to hear about what kind of movies we cover, I really like the episodes that I did on Basic Instinct and Showgirls. Those are like a really good companion episodes, because Paul Verhoeven and Joe Esterhaus did both those movies. And I really like the one on Rocky Horror Picture Show, because my guest was really amazing, and the one on Pink Flamingos was good. And
it's really going to be all of them, isn't it, Andy?
Yeah. But I've had like 18 so far.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I mean, I just want to give you kind of idea of the movies we talk about.
No, it's great.
So anything subversive, particularly focusing on women.
I was going to say the Basic Instinct episode actually as well, because I think that like that movie's so controversial, or was, it's not now in the same sense, but Paul Verhoeven is such an interesting filmmaker.
Oh, yeah. And as someone who's now watched so many interviews with him.
I love Paul Verhoeven.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, he's like such a creep. Yeah, but as a creep, I relate. So
yeah, and I will go to bat for Starship Troopers as a movie about America before anyone realized that it was.
The book that we talk about in the Showgirls episode called "It Doesn't Suck" by Andrew Naiman, which is about the movie Showgirls, he also dissects Starship Troopers, and he basically says the same thing that you said.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I had watched it with someone recently, and they were like, "I don't really see how this is about America," and I was like,
"Oh my god, it's inherently about that."
And you're raising money on Patreon.
I am patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. If you subscribe for $10 a month, you get bonus episodes on new releases.
It's great. It's a really good show.
I'm glad that you like it. And the talk I'm giving is at the New Orleans Film Festival in October. And it's a talk that I'm like been pitching around and speaking at colleges for, and maybe going to turn into a book or something. Who knows?
That's a great idea.
Yeah, but it's...
Do you want to talk a little bit about the subject?
Yeah, it's about representations of fat women in television and film. And, basically through my research, have divided representations of fat women into a few categories, and I expand on that and I give examples.
It sounds really good. And we love your show. And we love you.
I'm so glad.
And thank you for stopping by.
Thank
George
you.
really missed out. George, if you're listening, you really screwed this up.
I listen to you guys every week.
Yay. Thank you. All right, that's it. Thank you, Annie. And bye-bye.
Bye.